Hello all. In this particular tutorial, we will learn how to change Oracle database name using DBNEWID or NID utility. Before we proceed, let's understand what is DBID. DBID is internal unique identifier for a database. RMAN distinguishes databases by DBID. If you restore the database to another server, you cannot register original database and duplicate restore database in the same RMAN repository if they have the same DB ID. Now, DBNEWID utility solves this problem by allowing you to change any of the following: only DB ID of a database, only DB name of a database, or both DB name and DB ID of a database. If you want to know what's the DB ID of your database, you can use v.database. So you can say select DB ID from v.database. Now let's understand this particular problem in a little bit more of why you need to have a different DBID to register the database in RMAN. Now let's say you have two databases with same name but different DBID. Oracle will treat them as different databases. Even though database name is same, but since the DBID is different, these are different databases. So let's see here. So here you got a database called DB1 and another database called DB1. The DBID of first is 10, the DBID of the second is 20. Since the DBID of these two databases is different, these are considered as different databases. Now let's say you have two databases with a different name, DB3 and DB4, but DBID of both the databases is same. Since the DBID is same, these particular databases will be considered as a same database. Now, if you try to register DB3, then if you try to register DB4, the RMAN recovery catalog will work slightly strangely. What it will do, it will replace the DB3 with DB4 because it will think that now DB3 backups are DB4 because the DBID is same. To resolve this particular problem, you can use the DBNEWID utility, which will allow you to change the name, or it will allow you to change the DBID, or it will allow you to change the both. So DBNEWID utility can change only the DBID, only the DB name, or both DB name and DBID of the database. Now, before you proceed of changing the DBID, you should be careful. When DBID of database is changed, all previous backups and archive redo logs of the database becomes unusable because existing backups will have old DBID, which means that as soon as you change the DBID, you should take the full backup of the database after changing DBID. Remember that changing DBID will make your existing backups unusable. So make sure to take the full backup of database immediately after changing the DBID. Now, finally, the database should be in the mount mode to change either the DBID or database name. If you want to change the DBID or database name, your database should be in the mount mode. Now, let's understand how to change DBID and database name. So if you want to change only the DBID, so set the environmental variable. If you only want to change the DBID, you will say NID target is equal to slash. This particular command will not change the database name. It will only change the DBID. If you want to change only the database name, you will say NID target is equal to slash, give new name in the DB name clause. So whatever name you want to change. So Aura19D, we will change it to Aura22D. Set name is equal to Y. This set name is equal to Y tells the NID utility that you are interested in only changing the database name. You are not interested in changing the DBID. That's what set name is equal to Y. And if you use exactly same command, but if you exclude set name is equal to Y, then it will change the DBID and database name. So if you see this particular command and this particular command, it is exactly similar, except that we have excluded this clause. And if you don't use this particular clause, Oracle will think that you are interested in changing the DBID and database name. So using the NID utility, you can either change the DBID, you can change only the database name, or you can change both DBID and database name. So let's see how to do all of this. So let's proceed with our lab. Now, before I proceed with our lab, let's actually see the real problem. So I have got two databases. Let me connect to these two databases. Let me actually connect to one of first database here. And if you see, I'm connected to a database called Aura19D. And let me connect to the second database in a second screen. So let me connect to the second database. And if you see, I'm connecting to a database called Aura22D. Let me run a very simple query. Give me the name and DBID of this database. So let me run this here. And let me run exactly same query here. Now let me capture this output from both. So if I take this and if I put it here, let me put it actually in the beginning. So if I put it here and if I take from the second and if I put it here, you can see that these two databases have different name, but the DBID of both databases matches 706, 706. If you try to, since the DBID is same, Oracle will think that these are same database. Although the name is different, these are same database. And I'll show you in a minute. If you try to register this database in the recovery catalog, see how it will behave. So let's do something. Let's actually connect to the recovery catalog. Let me connect to the recovery catalog. And what I'll do, you can see we have connected to the recovery catalog, but we have connected to the target database Aura19D. Let's try to register this particular database in the recovery catalog. And database registered successfully. Now let's go to our recovery catalog database. So let's go to the second screen. And let's set the environmental to recovery catalog, and let's connect as SQL plus SSDBA. And let's select from the recovery catalog database RC underscore database. Let's select from this particular dictionary view, and you can see that the database that we registered Aura19D with DBID 106 is successfully registered here. So that looks good. So we have successfully registered one database in our recovery catalog. Now I'm going to keep that entry somewhere. So I'll take this and I'll put it here. So now what we will do, now we know that we have successfully registered Aura19D. So now let me exit from here and try to register. Let me just change this to Aura22D, which is another database. The name of the database is different, but the DBID is same, and you will see in a minute. So let's connect, and you can see that the name of the database is different. However, the DBID is same. Let's try to register this database. This is a different database with a different name. However, the DBID is same. Let's try to register this database in the recovery catalog and see what happens. Let's do that. And you can see it says it first tried to do the full sync, but at the end, it actually did the failure. So, and it says target database already registered. We don't have Aura22D in the recovery catalog. We have Aura19D, but when we try to register Aura22D, it actually failed. And this is why the DBID comes into the picture, because both of the databases has got exactly same DBID. Now let's actually go back here and run the same query on our recovery catalog and see the magic what exactly happened. It actually changed the entries of Aura19D to Aura22D. This is not an expected behavior. What we wanted to do is we wanted to register both of these particular databases into the recovery catalog. Now I can solve this particular problem by either changing the DBID of this database or this database. So let's change the DBID of Aura19D because we have successfully registered Aura22D. Let's try to register otherwise what we will do, we will actually unregister both of these databases. Let's actually say unregistered. Let's clean up our unregistered database, no prompt. Let's clean up our, and that's done. Let's actually verify what we have got in our recovery catalog. No rows selected. Now let's do one thing. Let's rename, let's change the DBID of the database Aura19D, and then we will catalog both of these databases again in the recovery catalog. Let's see whether we are able to fix the problem. So to change the DBID, we are going to change the DBID of Aura19D. At this moment, both of these databases has got the same DBID, as you can see. So we are going to change the DBID of Aura19D. We'll not touch Aura22D. We'll only change the DBID of Aura19D. Now, to do that, we have to, as I mentioned, we have to place our database in the mount mode. So we have to place the database in the mount mode. And one of the things that if you change the DBID, you have to start your database in the reset logs mode. So let's do that. So let's actually set the environmental variable. That's done. Let's shut down the database. Before I actually shut down the database, let me actually connect to the database. And let me pull this simple information, and which I'm going to capture because I'm going to create another table. So let's capture this information in a table. So let's put this here. So I created a table. Where is my table? Yeah, here. So here, this is the original database. So this is the original database, because I'm going to change the DBID first, and then I'm also going to show you the change. I'm going to change the database name as well. So that's why I've created this particular table. So we have captured this particular information. What is the DB name and what is the DBID? So that's done. So now what we'll do, we will just change the DBID of our database. To change the DBID, we have to place our database in the mount mode. So let's shut down the database. Let's start the database in the mount mode. And let's exit from SQL+. Now I have entered all these three commands. So give it a few seconds. So the database will come in the mount mode. As you can see, database is started in the mount mode. Here you can see. Once the database is started in the mount mode, we are now ready to change our DB name, DBID. And to do that, we'll say NID target is equal to /. So this is the very simple command. I'm going to take this particular command and I'm going to hit enter. And it prompts you here, it can say the current DBID is 706. Do you want to change the database ID of Aura19D? If you are okay, let's press Y and let's give it an enter. And you can see it changed from 706 to 106. So it has changed the DBID. So give it a few seconds. What will happen that this particular utility will shut down the database, and then you have to start the database in the reset logs mode, but it will also tell you one thing, that all of your backups are unusable. So it will very clearly tell you that your backups, and you can see the database ID has changed. All previous backups of this particular database are unusable, and you have to now start the database in the reset logs mode. So let's do that. So let's clear. Let's go back, and we'll connect as SQL plus SSDBA. We'll start up our database in the mount mode. And then we will open our database in the reset logs mode. So give it a few minutes for the startup mount. That's done. Let's open our database in reset logs mode. That's done. And now let me capture this information. Same query I'm going to use. Select name, DBID, open mode from BDLO database. Our database is the read-write mode. So let me take this information. And where is our table? So here is our table. Let's put our information. So you can see the database name is still the same. However, the DBID got changed from 706, it got changed to 106. So using the NID utility, we have successfully changed the DBID. Now, what we will do now is we will see whether our problem is resolved. So let's go back to our recovery catalog and find out. Let me actually do something. Let me clear this screen. And let's run this particular query, and you can see we don't have any database here. Now we will try to register both of these databases, the first database and the second database. So we'll try to register both of these database in the recovery catalog. So let's do that one by one. And let's see whether we get any failure or what exactly happens. So let's do that. So let's take this first database. So I connected to Aura 19D. Now the DBID is 106. Let's try to register that particular database and give it a few minutes. That's done. Let's try to connect to the second database, Aura 22D, which actually failed and it actually replaced the Aura 2019D entry. So it did something which we were not expecting to do. So and that's done. So we have successfully Aura 19D registered successfully, Aura 22D registered successfully. Let's go to our catalog, the recovery catalog, and let's run exactly same query, and you can see we have now successfully registered both Aura 19D and Aura 22D in our recovery catalog. So that particular problem. So the way we fix this particular problem is by changing the DBID. And once we change the DBID, Oracle now thinks that these databases are different databases. So this comes to this particular point that if the DBID is same, Oracle will think these are the same databases. If the DBID is different, Oracle will think that these are the different databases. So that's done. So we have successfully changed the DBID. We did not change the database name. We only changed the DBID. We learned how to change the DBID. And to do that, we used the NID utility and we said NID target is equal to / which only changed the DBID. Now let's ignore the recovery catalog. The thing that I wanted to show you on recovery catalog is done. Now let's understand how to actually change the database name alone. So at this moment, what I've done here, you can see this is our original database, Aura 19D. We changed the DBID from 706 to 106, but we kept the database name as same. Now, what if we wanted to change just the database name but not the DBID? Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. We have to use this particular syntax. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the database name of Aura 19D to Aura 22D. I'm going to change it from 19 to 22 and I'm going to keep the DBID same. So to do that, what we have to do, we have to create a P file. If we don't have the P file, we have to create the P file. So let's actually connect to our database. Let's set the environmental variable. We should be connected to Aura 19D. That's the database which I actually want to change the database name now. And let's create a P file. That's done. And then what we are going to do, we are actually I was supposed to, we have to shut down the database in startup in the mount mode. And the reason for that is because when we use the NID utility, our database should be in the mount mode. And I've run all these 3 commands. So give it a few seconds. And give it a few seconds for the database to get into mounted mode, and you can see database started in the mount mode. So it looks good. Let me clear the screen. And now what we are going to do, the database is in the mount mode. We are going to use this particular command. I'm going to show it to you one more time. So this particular command says that we are interested. Let me actually set the environmental variable before. So I already set it, but no harm in doing it one more time. So yes, we are connected to Aura 19D and we are going to change the database name of Aura 19D to Aura 22D, but not the DBID because I've used the set name is equal to Y clause. So let's do that. And here you can see that change database name from Aura 19D to Aura 22D. If you are okay, let's do Y. And what it's going to do is going to again shut down the database. It's going to write the new name into all of this particular file and it's going to shut down the database. Since we have not changed the DBID, only the database name, we don't have to start the database in reset logs mode. We can just start it normally. But remember one thing, since we have changed the DBID, we have to modify the P file, create the new password file, etc., which it will tell us at this. So you can see modify parameter file and generate a new password file before restarting. DBID completed successfully. So that's done. Now let's actually do that particular settings. So let's go to Oracle Home DBS location. And let's copy the init Aura file as init Aura 22D. I could just rename this particular because this particular database no longer exists. So I could have just renamed it, but let's actually keep that as a backup. So let's copy the init file and the password file. We can generate a new password file. Instead of that, I'm just copying the password file. Now let's do one small change in this particular. Now what we can do multiple changes, but let's actually do one small change. And wherever there is a DB name, so let's go to that. So wherever there is a DB name, because we changed the DB name, let's just change this to Aura22D. Now, if you wanted to change all of the other parameters, you can change it. But if you want to change the diagnostic dash, the control location, we have to modify the control file location, the dump file, we'll have to create that directory, etc. So I'm not going to do that. You can definitely do that. It's a bit complicated, but not difficult. So I'm going to change only one single parameter called DB name as Aura22D. So as of now, this particular P file I created before shutting down, you can see I created this particular P file, and now we changed the DBID. So here you can see that using this particular command, we changed the DB and that command is gone. So we just changed the DB name, and now I copied the init parameter file, the original init parameter file, and I only changed one parameter. Let me actually show it to you. Grep for 22D, and I only changed the DB name. So now since we have also changed, let's actually add an entry in etc Aura tab as well as add this entry. Now I can just rename that original entry. I can just rename this entry because we have replaced that particular database. We have renamed that particular database, but that's okay. We will keep it for now, and then we can comment it at a later point in time. So now let's set the environmental variable to the Aura22D, the new database name that we have changed. Let's connect to our database SQL plus sysdba. Let's say startup. We should be able to start up normally. Let's say startup, and then let's verify what's our database name and what's our DBID. So let's take this particular command. Let's see whether the database comes up normally. It should come, and you can see database open. We don't have to do the reset logs. We can do normal startup. So that's done. And let's run this particular query, and you can see the database is in rewrite mode, and the DB, let's actually verify this. Let's take this, go to our table. Let's go to our table, and here let me put it. So post DB name change. So let's take this, put it here, and let's take this and put it here. And if you notice the pattern, first time we said we want to change the DBID. So from 706, it changed to 106, but the database name remained the same. And then we said we want to change the database name, but the DBID remained the same. Now I could have changed the DBID and database name at the same time using the third command, which is the NID target. So exactly same command. Now that I have done all of this, I do not want to waste your time in showing you this particular option. This particular option will change the DBID and database name. We have already changed the database name, but if you want to change the DBID again, we have changed it once, but you want to change it again, or you want to do both of these actions in the same command, then you can do that using NID target is equal to /DB name. You have to exclude this particular clause, and you have to give the new DB name. So this particular tutorial, I hope you like this particular tutorial. In this particular tutorial, we learned how to change the Oracle database name using DBNEWID utility. And this particular utility allows you to change only the DBID, only the DB name, or both DB name and DBID of a database. Now, before I end, let me give you a warning that if you change the DBID, make sure to take the full backup of a database because previous backups and archive logs will become unusable. So make sure to take the full backup of the database if you change the DBID. And before I end, let me also give you the final thing that if the DBID is same, even though database name is different, Oracle will consider those as the same databases. So I hope this particular tutorial was useful. Thank you for watching. If you do like the videos that I'm uploading, if you do like the content that I'm uploading to my channel, do hit the like button, do hit the subscribe button. Thank you and see you in next tutorial. Till then, bye bye.